Hello and welcome friends back to Ari Does Things, and I'm Ari. We're going to be doing something else today. If you paid attention a couple of weeks ago, maybe at this point, I don't know when I'm posting this video, but anyway, at some point in the past, I posted an acrylic yarn tutorial for my Tarot Mat drawstring bag, and I promised you the weight 6 blanket weight tutorial, and here we are. We have made another one to make a tutorial for you today. So this also fits Zeke's Arcana from Zeke's Lunchbox, which is a 5x7 by 2 inch box. So we'll go ahead and get started on this 18-inch version of the blanket weight yarn tarot drawstring mat bag. Let's go ahead and get to it. Boop! Alright, so today we're going to need several different things. We're going to need a weight 6 blanket yarn, at least probably close to 1 skein if you're using just the single color, but just a portion of a skein if you're using more than 1 color. I decided today to use this multicolor variegated Bernat blanket yarn in Ocean Shades. And we will need some scissors. You'll need the scissors every row or every other row if you're changing colors, or at the end if you're using a single color or yarn. And we will also need our 8mm crochet hook today. I'm using a bamboo hook because that's the only one I have in that size. And to measure your finished product and make sure that it's the right size for what you need, you'll need a measuring tape or a ruler of some sort, probably a yardstick, because typically you want at least like an 18-inch mat bag. So let's go ahead and get started without any further ado. So we're gonna go ahead and take the end of this blanket yarn here, and I'm actually gonna go ahead and I like to, at the beginning, unfurl some of the yarn. Now it's easiest if you start unfurling it from the back. That way, as you're pulling on the yarn, you're pulling it front to back. So it'll be easier and won't tangle as much. So now that we've got that done, we're gonna go ahead and take our 8mm hook. We're gonna leave some bit of a tail, and we're going to start our magic ring. And if it helps you to have the pattern should be available by the time I'm posting this video at realalternatives.art. So you'll get both versions of the pattern when you purchase either. You'll get the weight 4 and the weight 6 version. So today we're working with the weight 6 version. We start with the magic ring, and then from there we chain 3. 1, 2, 3. And then we add 2 double crochets, and the way that you double crochet is you yarn over and then go through the loop, pull the yarn through, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, yarn over and pull through the last 2 loops. Now we're gonna work this first row in clusters of 3, so your first chain 3 counts as your double crochet stitch. So you'll have 1, 2, and then 1 more double crochet. Again, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through the last 2. Now in between each cluster of 3 on this row, and subsequent rows will be different, but on this first row, in between each cluster, you're going to go ahead and chain 1 for the corner. So don't forget to chain 1 in between each of the 4 clusters. So we're gonna make more clusters. That's the first double crochet, second double crochet, and third double crochet. So that forms the second cluster, and that's when we chain 1. So we're gonna do that 2 more times. And when you're done with that last stitch in the 4th cluster, you're gonna go ahead, you can go ahead and pull the magic ring closed now. And you're gonna go ahead and chain one last time before you slip stitch around the first double crochet. Not single crochet, slip stitch, which is where you, let me show you again. You just put this hook without yarning over through that first space between the first 2 double crochets. Then you yarn over, and instead of yarning over again, you just simply pull it through the last loop. So there we have our first row. You can wait till the end to tie off this other yarn. But at the beginning of every single row, we're gonna chain 3, which always counts as our first double crochet. Now for this second row, we're going to add 2 more double crochets. So for clusters of 3, 2 more double crochets in this same stitch gap in the cluster that this first double crochet is coming from. So we'll yarn over, go through there, pull through, and do that a second time. And then in between the clusters, you will not put a space, so you won't chain 1 until you're done with that side. So for this second row, there should be 2 clusters of 3 double crochets in each side before you chain 1 to turn the corner. So we'll go ahead and make this second cluster. And then that's when we'll go ahead and chain 1 for the corner. And then skipping the corner space, we're gonna go into the next cluster gap. So we're gonna yarn over and pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. So we'll go ahead and continue putting 3 double crochet per cluster gap. So no space between the 2 clusters. Just continue on with the next cluster. And then at the end of that side of the row, we'll chain 1. Skipping the corner space, again, only going into the gaps within the clusters. All right, and then don't forget at the end of every round, every row, you're going to chain 1 before you slip stitch into that first space. And don't forget, if you're working in multiple colors, you would either have every single row a different color or every 3rd row. So there would be 2 of the same color, and then the 3rd and 4th row would be a different color, and then so on and so forth. So at the beginning of every row, we chain 3. And then on this 3rd row, you're only going to have 2 stitches per cluster gap. So in the first one, we'll just add 1 extra stitch, and then still without chaining 1 in between the cluster gaps and in between the clusters on the last row. We're gonna just put 2 more double crochet in the second cluster gap in the first cluster. And then no chaining 1, skipping the space, the gap between the 2 clusters. We're only going into the gaps within the clusters. So skipping that middle gap, we go into the space in the next cluster with 2 stitches of double crochet. And then without chaining 1, we do 2 into the next cluster gap. And it's then when we get to the corner that we chain 1. And then skipping the corner gap space, we double crochet 2 into the next cluster gap. And then we're going to continue on that way for the rest of the round, only chaining 1 at the end of the side where the corner gap already is, and then skipping the gaps between clusters. Also, don't forget this is a 2 double crochet round, not 3. And don't forget, after the last stitch in the round, the very last stitch is that chain 1 and then a slip stitch. And as you can kind of see, it's curling up around the edges, so that lets us know that we need to go back and do another round where it is 3 double crochet per cluster per gap. So again, we're going to go ahead and start the row off by chaining 3, and since this is a 3 double crochet per cluster gap, we're going to go into the same space that we're starting from with 2 extra double crochet. Now, when you're going from a round of 2, you're gonna have to be careful, because remember, we're only doing the cluster gaps, not the gaps between clusters. So basically every other gap you're going to go into. So we did this first gap, that was the first double crochet was coming from. Then we're skipping this next gap, the gap between the clusters, to go into this third gap with double crochets. And remember, we're doing 3 double crochets per cluster gap this go around. And remember, we're never chaining 1 until we get to the corners. Skipping the corner gap there for the next gap. Now you can make this as big as you want. All you have to do is every time it starts curling up too much, you just add in a row of 3 instead of 2. And as long as it's not curling, you work in rows of clusters of 2. So that's how you make it even bigger than the 18-inch mat that we're making today. And then let's not forget, after that last double crochet, to chain 1 before we slip stitch. And now, since I'm not changing colors, I don't need to cut the yarn, but you might be cutting the yarn in between there. So for every single row, we always start with the chain 3. And on this next row, this is row, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For rows 5 and 6, they're gonna be clusters of 2. So we're gonna go ahead around and do two double crochet stitches per cluster gap, skipping the gap between clusters to only do the gaps in the cluster. And then we're gonna be chaining 1 at every corner. So as of right now, there should be 4 of these clusters of 3 per side. So you're going to have 2 groups of 2 double crochet clusters in each of these 4, and then you're gonna turn the corner. So we'll go ahead and do that and meet you right back. All right, so as you can see, after this last row that we did, row 6, after row 5 and 6 in clusters of 2, it's kind of curling. So at row 7, that's when we're going to go ahead and chain 3, and then add 3 if I could talk right, 3 double crochet stitches per stitch gap, per cluster gap. So skipping those gaps again between the clusters and not chaining 1 until we turn the corner. Okay, so now that we are done with the 7th row, we're going to go ahead on the 8th and 9th row, which the 9th row should be the end if you're doing an 18-inch taro bag. So for those 2 rows, we're going to do the 2 double crochet stitches per cluster in each of the cluster gaps. So for the clusters of 3, that means 2 new clusters, and then on the subsequent row, it'll be 1 new cluster per cluster, because there will only be 1 gap in those. So we're gonna go ahead, if you need to make it bigger, just like I said, add clusters of 3 instead of 2 wherever it starts curling a little bit much. But we're gonna go ahead and do that and come back with how to make the tie that goes around the bag at the end. Don't forget to also measure and make it whatever size you want. Right now we're at about 14.5, almost 15 inches. So by the time we get these next 2 rows in there, we should be good for an 18-inch bag. So at the end of the final row, don't forget that chain 1, and then you slip stitch into that first double crochet, and then you'll just pull the yarn through and cut off a little tail that you can weave in. Now our final measure should be at least 18 inches. And it's almost exactly, it's between 18 and 18.5. So make sure you measure before you cut. So measure twice, cut once, but I've already done this before, so I knew it was gonna be the right amount of stitches. And as you can see, it kind of does curl a little bit at the edges, like fluffy curls instead of just curling inward. So what you'll probably want to do if you want to make it 20 inches or bigger is continue on with the rows of just 2 stitches per cluster gap for at least another row or 2 before you add any more than 2 per cluster. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and find the end of our yarn and find the second end of the yarn. because it's important that you have 2 strands for this next bit. So if you're using 2 different colors of yarn, just use the 2 different colors of yarn. But if you're using the same yarn, go ahead and find both of your ends. By now, if you were using a Bernat blanket skein that has 220 yards or 201 meters, you should have a little bit, about twice or a little bit more than twice this amount left, unless you're going bigger. So you're just gonna go ahead and take these 2 ends of yarn, and we're going to chain somewhere between 1 and 200. I'll come back at the end and let you know how many we chained. But we're gonna leave a little bit of a tail on the end and do a slip knot with both of the yarns. Still with the 8mm hook. And then we just count. 1, 2, 3, 97, 98, 99, and 100. And we're just going to check that around the perimeter and see how much longer we have to go. So it's actually almost around the perimeter now. So I would say we need about 150 or less. So let's just do 50 more and see. 1, 2, 3. 47, 48, 49, and 50. So let's check it again around the perimeter. And this time it looks like we probably have enough. So I'm going to go ahead and check before I pull this through. I'm gonna go ahead and just weave this in and see if we've done it right. So you wanna go into the second row down and you wanna go kind of in the middle. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we'll start here and pull this through. And then we'll just pull it in and around each subsequent cluster. All right, so the main thing you want to check is to make sure that you have some kind of leftover peeking out. So since we do, I think 150 is the good golden number. So what we're gonna do is we're actually going to chain 151. So one more chain. And then on that chain, that's when we'll go ahead and cut off about the same amount as we did for the last one. And then we'll go ahead and pull that through. And then we'll actually even up the ends. Once that's done, we can go ahead and we're going to just pull this to where it's about the same length from the body of the bag. And it's now that we can go ahead and weave in our ends. Once we make sure they're securely tied off, the one at the edge should already be tied off when we ended it earlier. Alright, so that one's weaved in. And then we're going to go ahead and make sure this is pulled nice and tight at the magic ring circle, centered. And then we're going to just tie that probably 3 or 4 times. And then we'll weave that in as well. And so there you have it, the Tarot Mat Drawstring bag. It cinches down to big enough that it should be able to hold a 5 by 7 inch by 2 inch tarot box. So about the biggest tarot box that I own. And then when you uncinch it, just make sure you're pulling from the middle so that it remains as even as possible. And there you have it. I'm glad you were with me today to make this tarot deck mat drawstring bag out of Bernat blanket yarn in the color Ocean Shades. Hopefully you've enjoyed following along. The pattern is for sale on my website. Like I said earlier, you'll get both versions, the weight 4 and weight 6 versions of the pattern for $5 because it's my first pattern and I want to be kind and give the world this wonderful thing for super cheap. So I want to just spread the love. So go ahead, check out realalternatives.art and get the pattern before or after you try this tutorial. If you have more fun following a pattern or it's just better for you, just go ahead and get that. If you had fun following the tutorial but you don't want to have to rewatch the tutorial every time you make the bag, get the pattern. Just look at that, reference that. But anyway, it has been great being here with you today to make this beautiful object. So I hope you have enjoyed. Please let me know what you want to see me make next. I am going to be coming out with a tutorial for the Virgo top eventually, the top that I am wearing in today's video. So I still have to learn how to grade my patterns. So, ooh, that's coming soon. But once I figure that out, I'll get that out to you as well with the choker bit, or you can make it without the choker bit if you want. That's up to you. But anyway, I'm gonna leave it there for this video. Hope you've had fun, stay golden, and be good. I'll see you next time. Bye!